den. Rád bych vás přivítal všechny v hojném počtu na přednášce Lukáše Wojciechowského, který je architektem, kurátorem, historikem architektury, působí ve Vroclavě ve vlastním ofisu VROA a zároveň má nadaci Jednostka Architektury, zabývá se vlastně studiem, obnovou a propagací válečné architektury. Je super.
OK,
Sám vám řekne více ke své práci a tato přednáška se uskutečnila díky výstavě, kterou Lukáš společně s udělali výstavu mladých polských architektů, která je Galerie Architektury a příští týden 4. bude zahájena, kde bude také Lukáš a výstava bude už o 4. přístupná, se na ní můžete podívat. Jsme tady díky podpoře Institutu Adama Mickiewicze, Polského institutu a ty další partnery všichni musí. A já moc děkuji Lukášovi, že přijel a
Okay, thank you. Okay, hello. It's nice to meet you here. It's a nice spring evening, so I hope it won't be lost here. I came here to present you, to tell you something about the exhibition that takes place, as Gabriel said, in Galerie Architektury Brno, but also I will present you or tell you the story of my small office and my friends, our buildings, and also our foundation for architecture, because we established 2 years ago a foundation to promote architecture. But of course, because we are architects, so it all started with architectural projects and architectural thinking. And in 2006, we decided to establish our own office in Wrocław, post-German city, because before the Second World War it was Breslau. And I will tell you the story how we became architects, and how we work with architecture and why architecture is still fascinating for us. I will tell you also something about failures of being architect, because I'm very critical about our architecture, so maybe I won't tell you all the problems, but maybe some of them, that you as students are aware that the profession is extremely difficult, but also on the other hand very satisfying. Well, we began with big hopes, and because we received a prize in European competition. You probably know the European housing competition. It's international competition with plenty of sites in whole Europe. And we received the prize in United Kingdom, in Milton Keynes, very interesting new town, 60 kilometers from London. And we had big hopes. Because we met the developer in London, and they were very optimistic, but of course it ended up with big hopes. We never built it, but we still have some big hopes about our office. So this is just a simple introduction. One of the bigger reasons to establish our office was when we teamed up with our friends from university. We won a competition in Wrocław for a big building, a conference center, which was the renovation of this famous design of Jahrhundertshalle or Centennial Hall, or in Polish Hala Stulecia, designed by Max Berg, German architect, in 1913. This is one of the old images that we were really inspired by this illumination. And what is important, the place didn't look like this anymore. As you can see from this aerial photo from 1940s, the hall was standing in 1945 after the war, but the pavilion was burned and was in ruins. So our design, just a second. Oh, our design was, this is the existing building. This one is existing, and we added two wings to the building, and we wanted to make the building as small and as modest, as neutral as possible. And this is generally our philosophy, if I can call it a philosophy. It's just an idea for architecture. We don't want too much design in our architecture. So, and also we were double happy with winning the competition, because we also went against the rules of the competition. Because the brief of the competition was to build a building as double height as this one. So you can imagine here the two big buildings, also here, that would blind some views from the landscape. And the landscape is UNESCO heritage site, so we just had to protect it. And we had to trick a little, because we squeezed the building, but we had the same program as the others. So we had to cheat a bit, you know, to make some spaces flexible, or the program was squeezed, because the program was squeezed in much fewer spaces. But I'm telling this to you because it is always a satisfaction that when you think yourself, you don't agree when you are critical about the brief of a competition, when you're critical about the opinion of others. It's always it can be really refreshing for you and for the project. So I showed at the beginning the illumination of the old building, and the building was actually well, similar. We made this horizontal setting of the layout of the building just to continue the idea of Max Berg. And also here you can see that what is most important is this old architecture, and what we added are just simple, small details. Just as in the interior, we use bright colors, natural light, and just like a kind of a tabula rasa, a kind of a background for old heritage, but also a background for people's activities that can appear here. And the same with the big auditorium that we had to squeeze into a smaller place, but on the other hand, we just made it as neutral as possible. The problems in these buildings, the lessons we learned, is that when you think about the clarity of space, when you think about flexibility, you also have to have a responsible owner of the building. So, and it's in Poland especially, it doesn't work that well. For example, here you could see from the outside that this is glass facade that opens to this UNESCO heritage site. But these blinders here are usually closed. And what they do, they use the space behind for putting some garbage. So you see it from outside, yeah? But they don't have any imagination. And of course, we can say the architect is not right, the life is right. Yeah? But this is the question, how can we work out architecture that can be understood by the owner, because the users are a different thing. By the same area, we also designed a big garage, underground garage. Here you have some really not so visible cubes, and we also kept them in the same character. But I'm showing this garage only because my very interest in architecture are cars. So I will continue later telling you some other stories. The other building that we made an adaptation and renovation of was very interesting in historical terms, because This is also 1945 picture, and this is the air raid shelter. It's a bunker built in 1942 by the Nazis, so it's totally different story. But we had to adapt this building into the Museum of Contemporary Arts in Wrocław. So here around you can see everything was demolished. This is the aerial photo, so everything around is burned, and this shelter is like a last man standing. Yeah? It's just the last building that was left here. It is very interesting, the history of the building, because it's not underground shelter, it's like an on-site shelter, and the Germans built these kind of bunkers in Berlin, for example, or in Hamburg, or in Vienna. They were called Flak Towers. Flak are the anti-aircraft guns, and they put anti-aircraft guns. I don't know if any one of you plays games, but if you play Call of Duty World War II, there is one map on the Flak Tower. But it wasn't a Flak Tower, it was similar, but it was to pretend to be a public building. Of course, we have to remember that during the Second World War, there were no lasers or electronic guiding missiles or anything like this. It was to pretend the public building from a bomber's view, so it was like few meters above. Yeah? And we added a small cafeteria on the flat top of the roof. The roof is really big because it has 2 meters. It is 2 meters thick, and the walls are reinforced concrete, like 1.2 meters thick also. So you can imagine it is like a super building, like a superhero, yeah? Actually Nazi superhero. So we have to think about the character of the building, and we wanted to, we don't, when we look at the history of the building, we look at it critically. We don't want to reconstruct the building, because interior of the building was originally painted white, but we decided to demolish the plaster, to uncover the reinforced concrete walls, just to give people the idea of the reinforced concrete shell. So here also the building was like a very claustrophobic inside. You can imagine this bunker. So we decided to clear all the holes. Of course, these openings are original, but they were bricked, and we just cleared them just to make as big perspectives inside as it is possible. So you can see that the very claustrophobic small building in some way became kind of deep building. It was very important for us. But on the other hand, what you can see here, it's like, again, we call it 0% of design, because what we added, it was graphic designers' letters, and also the new steel elements that were black, also the new furniture, new elements of structure, and so on. But for example, here, it is the big opening with the crate, but originally it was the elevator here. So we decided not to cover this, not to disguise it, but to show the opening of the elevator. So when you look through the crate, you can see all the levels through the building. And also the building, again, was extremely cheap. It costed €1 million, and it was a big stress for us to keep the low budget. You can imagine that the director of the construction company during the process of renovation got a heart attack, and also the guy who was responsible for electricity, he also got a heart attack. So it was really dreadful Nazi building. So it was quite a story. And looking at the cafeteria, it is open, and we added only this yellow-green color. Actually, we call it architectural green, because plenty of architects use this kind of color. And we made this building, we made the project for renovation, but we became friends with the director of the museum, and we made some exhibitions inside the museum, because we are not very well with the Museum of Architecture, so we made some exhibitions about architecture in the Museum of Contemporary Arts. And now I will skip for a moment from our projects to the projects of other architects that we are very interested in, because what is very important for us, it's not only building, but also researching architecture and knowing our ancestors, knowing our roots. So one of the exhibitions was about one crazy designer that was quite forgotten, and he was like a professor in Academy of Fine Arts, and he actually designed cars and motorcycles. Later I will show you them, but he also made some architectural sketches, and one of these sketches was cities hanged on Sputniks. Yeah, so it was a crazy idea from 1970s, and he made only the sketch only. But what we did for the exhibition, we did models and also visualizations, like this kind of science fiction movie setting, to present his vision. So these are cities hanged on Sputniks. I think it's a little bit too dark, but what you can see here are the lines and the units that climb along the perimeter. And we made big models, but also we worked with his other projects. This was a super cool project for a mountain shelter. So the idea of the architect was to cut off the peak of the mountain and then build it as a building. So we did a visualization of it here, but also he designed a special train that was hidden underground. So we also like recreated it with our imagination. He also had a crazy idea of housing. So you can see like a big Bjarke Ingels housing, but overlapped a little bit. And here you can see the car elevators, and you could just enter with your car to your house and live in your car too. And this is actually a car designed also by Meissner. And he had also another crazy idea. Remember, it's 1970s. It's not now, but he had the idea for these machines, androids. Here is the human scale. So this android was repeating the movements of the driver, and this one doesn't have a head, so it repeats the same movements. So if you watched Alien and Ripley walking in this kind of machines, so it's similar, or maybe some of you saw the super kitschy, but I really loved it, Pacific Rim movie. So it's a similar idea, and we also did the visualization. So here is the worker here, and here is the headless robot repeating the movements. And we also made models of it. Well, actually, it was really fun to do it. Here is the human being. And the guy, Krzysztof Meissner, of course, if you want to know more about the guy, you can enter the website of our foundation. I think I can write it later, but there you will find catalogs in English, so you can download them for free, of course. And he designed a crazy car. It was in 1960s, and this car had a very special doors opening. These ones open normally, but these ones are like, in English they are called suicide doors. So they open, not like if you know Opel Meriva, there were similar solutions, but years after. He also, inside of the car, he also designed a bed that you can sleep in. So it was really, really cool and interesting car. And just look at the form of the car, and it's 1960s. early 1960s. So it's not that obvious. Maybe it's not Tatra, but it's still cool. Yeah? And he also designed this car, very, very cool in my opinion. Very small car, and it was called Fafik. It's like a funny name. It's I would say Kret. Yeah, it's like the same character of the name. And here is a crazy motorcycle. I don't know how it worked. It could work, but this was just element. And here is the wheel. And here is so you can't see the turning of the wheel. So it's a little crazy, but in some way it's beautiful. And I put this visualization in our garage. Yeah, so you can see. Anyway. And we make some exhibition in Motorization Museum also, not only in Museum of Contemporary Arts. Here is Osa. This is a scooter designed also by Krzysztof Meissner. It's one of his most famous designs. You can see the form of it was of course inspired by Vespa, but it was very popular in Poland. Another exhibition that we made, it was also very interesting guy, a professor who is already dead, but he was he worked from 1950s, and we found a book of his. When I borrowed this book from a library, it is his professor of university in Wrocław. When I borrowed it, the last time it was borrowed, it was 1985, so everyone forgot about him. And in this book, we found plenty of these kind of sketches that we again wanted to translate into ready-made buildings. Here is one of his most famous buildings. It's Śnieżka shelter. Yes, so you probably know it. Actually, I can tell you an interesting story that I met other professors once in the university, and he told me that it is a copy of the other building, and actually it is, I found the project by Frank Lloyd Wright, a tennis club, which is actually the same. So it's funny, but it's on the other hand, I would say I'm not critical about it, because in 1960s, in Poland, to build something like Frank Lloyd Wright in the United States, it must have been a huge success. And of course he built it, and Frank didn't. So it's really cool. Anyway, here you can see that we are again in the Museum of Contemporary Arts in the shelter. And also we did other visualizations by his sketches, and here you can see this Jetsons-like building, but it was very interesting that he designed that it's supported by a big stone. Yeah, so it's really, I think it's really cool, this image. We put his buildings in United States, because we thought it's really cool, because he loved United States, and we thought that maybe we can put them here in the landscape, in an American landscape, because we didn't know where his buildings were about to stay in Poland. So we had this idea to put one of these crazy buildings here in this Zabryskie Point, yeah, the area. And also this is Zabryskie Point, and here is, I think it's Dodge Challenger, I'm not sure, but anyway, one of his buildings really fits into the landscape, and this is the interior, but it's in Poland, yeah, because it's winter. So you can see the big opening here, and it's very quality-like space. So we were fascinated by the architect, who actually didn't realize that much. So we decided to use visualizations to tell a story about him. Another person that we were fascinated with, and this is a little bit longer story, it's Mrs. Jadwiga Grabowska-Hawrylak. Sorry for the long name, but you will find it, again, you will find it on our website, and you can download the catalog in English. So, and she is very special. She was born 96 years ago. She's still between us, and she's really is vivid and inspiring person. But she is the first female graduate from our university, and she is real huge inspiration for us in the university, because she was she's very small, but she was a big modernist. She was very, I'm sorry for that word, but she is really badass, yeah? She's really straightforward, and she really makes very strong buildings. One of her buildings that you maybe you know, maybe not, built in Wrocław are these towers that were prefabricated. Here you have a photo, very interesting photo set by Kuba Certowicz, the professional photographer. I borrowed these photos from him. But what we did on our exhibition is that these buildings were called brutalist. Of course, the term brutalism is, I am very suspicious about the term, because everyone uses the term brutalism, and actually the story behind brutalism is that it was first used according to Peter and Alison Smithson, because Peter Smithson, during when he was a student, he had the nickname Brutus. So, and this is the story from Rainer Barnham, so probably it's true. Anyway, the architect, when I started to talk and meet with the architect, because we wanted to make an exhibition, she told us that these buildings are not brutal, but they are dirty. In Polish, these two words are very close to each other, brutal and brud. I don't know how it's in Czech, but dirt is brud in Polish. So we make again the visualizations for the buildings, how they could look like when they were renovated. So we made this super white and black contrast just to show the quality of the architecture, but as you can see, there are no details. It's just a provocation to see the spatial quality of this building. The same we did with her other buildings that are totally now in state of decay, they are yellow painted or something, and also with her schools that are like now they are treated as with neglect, but they are really sophisticated designs, and also double floor multi-family housing block, which is really interesting. So we made an exhibition, we made models, we made interviews, and then by some coincidence we got the commission for renovating of these buildings in reality. So as you can see, making an exhibition, we made something like an exhibition because we were fascinated with the project, and then after a year or two we got the commission to actually do it. We were lucky, but it's when you want to do something as architects, sometimes you have to have this, maybe keep big hopes in your pocket, but to work and then to be lucky. Well, I don't know if we are lucky, but now the buildings look like this. I just put some photos from Google Images because they are mostly true. So you can see they are renovated and they are white. And the architect, she said, finally I'm happy with the project. So, because when the buildings were built, she told me that for 2 years she didn't look at the buildings. So it was really interesting. And this is a funny article from one of the magazines, and it's called Manhattan, because it's called Manhattan is resurrected. You know, it's like a Jesus or something, so this is like typical Polish religious approach. And here you can see also the site of these buildings. It's like, it's here, it's demolished. We deal with demolished areas because Wrocław was demolished during the Second World War in more than 80%. So it was really a disaster, but this is the image that tells a story of a place. And this place where these buildings, the towers were built in the 70s, looked like this, and this is extremely interesting story about our city, because here, from this bridge to the other, it is the center of the city. Nazis decided, because they were surrounded by Red Army, they decided to build an airfield in the center of the city. You can imagine the terrifying thing about building an airfield in the city center. You need to demolish plenty of buildings, and actually 13,000 people died building the airfield. So, and these buildings that I showed before, these ones, they stand on the old airfield. But after, when the Stalin was alive, there were these grandiose designs, and this is exactly here the towers are standing now, but in the 50s they planned to make this kind of Stalinist, social realist architecture. But then they built this, and here on this photo, or from the construction site in the 60s, you can see that the buildings were originally meant to be white. But later also, we did a big exhibition, another exhibition, but now a big one about the small lady. It was curated by Michał Duda, the curator from the Museum of Architecture, but we did the project of the exhibition, and here you can see this is the model, and we decided that the lady was really small, and she had a really small team of 2 architects on all these big projects. We decided that we have to make a huge table with her projects to contrast with her small team. So we actually, the table was a bit shorter than on the model, because it was one of the most expensive tables in the history of Wrocław. I think it was, the cost of it was 15,000 euro, so it was quite expensive. It was a big budget. We have a big budget here. Anyway, you can see that the idea was that you get into the table and you look at the projects like they were on the table of the architect. Because architects back then, I don't know if you are aware, didn't use computers. So it is like, of course you know it, but it's like this is the big table and the people like getting deep into the table. The other thing that we are very interested in, and I personally am very interested in, is the topic of cars and architecture. And we also made some exhibitions about it. This is the model that I've made, because I also love to make models, of the Egypt super small kiosk from 1960s. But when you look at architecture dedicated to cars in the 20th century, it's really outstanding lesson how architects were thinking according to technological advancement. In Czech Republic, in a mid-war period in Czechoslovakia, there were plenty of really cool garages. Not in Poland, but in Czech Republic also, and I was so fascinated with this 20th century design that we made the exhibition. Here you have a super interesting project that was actually realized in Germany. Well, here is the exit of this gas station. You probably know it's by Arne Jacobsen in Copenhagen, but this no longer exists. Look at this building. It's a Citroën showroom in Paris. It's demolished, but it was built in 1930s. So it's outstanding and super interesting and super contemporary architecture, with probably one of the biggest windows in the world. That was actually the structure of it was designed by Jean Plouffe, young, back then young structural engineer. But we also have this kind of gas station. This one is from France. That is like very picturesque, and it's like an oil tank here, so it's really funny. But also these kind of very early gas stations that were actually shops, and you could buy an oil and gas from these boxes here. There were no pumps at the beginning. And okay, so this was about the exhibitions. Now I'm going back to the ruins, and this is one of our recent projects that we made here. Again, it's a 1945 Wrocław. Then it's in a bigger area after the war, where people were selling everything that was taken from German houses. They were like not stealing, but they were just selling it. And then you can see it's, because the Germans were no longer here, so it was not stealing. Yeah? But actually, these places were called Schabelplatz, which means thieves' market, yeah, or something. Anyway, then in 60s, you can see the contrast and the optimism and the big hopes of architects that were building these super wide, contemporary, modern buildings for the people who actually, who mentally were just in the wartime period. This is another photo. These buildings, they are really in some way cool, but they get old very fastly because of non-maintenance or bad materials and so on. And here you can see the state now, and here you can see the renovation we did of a part of the building because there was no money for more. And we just made like an example renovation. You will see a funny image here. You can see it here. It's renovated, and then because the owners here it is state-owned, and here are the private owners. So we had to make it like a very just a part of the building. But what we wanted to do was to recreate the original character of the building. It's not that very simple because you have to think about the windows that cannot be when the building is insulated. They have to be in the line of the facade, and so on and so on. We also use these stone facades that were very popular in Soviet times. But if you look at this, it's not very well done because now people don't know how to make them anymore. So it's really bad done, but it's we added also like a funny neon. But what you can see is what we try to do is to add almost nothing to this kind of architecture, but we also love these kind of prefabs, or I don't know, Plattenbau or Panelaki, as they call it. Yeah? So you can see that we try to protect the character and also the cheap atmosphere of the interior, because here are just super simple railings. Yes, so we just painted them yellow, but it was the original color. So it was again 0% of design. And just to be finishing. I'll show you one of the buildings that we did in our studio that is not built on ruins. It's actually built outside the city. And again, we were lucky to win a competition for a big school. But I told you that I'll tell you also about failures. The failure of this building was something that we knew at the beginning. This school is for 1,200 pupils. It's extremely big. And these kind of schools are built I believe, these big schools are built only in Poland and China and nowhere else. It's really crazy, I think. Anyway, what we tried to do was to make a super simple building that you can divide into smaller parts. Of course, the budget was also about building one big building. And we did the rigid form of the layout of the plan was translated into the facade and also into the landscape. So you can see that these divisions, the structural divisions of the buildings are visible also in the landscape design. Here it is quite clear. And interior is also like very straightforward, that we just didn't want to add anything. And again, as I said at the beginning, we wanted to make a building a kind of a background for activities. And actually now there are plenty of colorful things around the building designed by children. But also what we wanted to do was to add plenty of light into the building. And we decided that we make no corridors, not double-sided corridors. So every time you walk somewhere, you see the exterior. So it was the only advantage that we could add. So you don't have blind, dark corridors. Here you can see one of the atriums, but here you can see the horses and the landscape because it's on the suburbs of Wrocław. But also on the other hand, it is clear how the structure of the building works. So it's no like bamboozle or any disguising of any structural elements, but we just try to make it straightforward. Of course, you can probably see some disadvantages in the building. The installations are not super well designed, but this is what we do. And I'm here also to invite you for the, just a second, for the exhibition. Okay, sorry. I forgot that I haven't put here this presentation. Just a second. Sorry. I have to go through. Okay, I'll say. I'll keep you busy. The exhibition has a free catalog here in this newspaper. This is the only newspaper from Poland where you don't have bad news about stupid government or something. So here you will have all the projects that you can read about them when you visit the exhibition. Gabriel said that I cannot give it to you because you have to come to the exhibition on 4th April next week and then you can take it. But what is about the exhibition? The exhibition design, I wanted to tell you something about exhibition design, again, from the architectural point of view. This is the 2.5D, it's 2.5 dimension. I mean, we didn't have money to make 3D models, so we made it like 2.5D models. You know, 2.5D is like a Mario Bros game or some. It was 2D, but then they added some depth, but it's like limited. So the idea was to make a super cheap exhibition. We had a budget of just a second. I have to count it. 15,000 zloty. It was 3,000 euros for the whole exhibition. Normally the exhibition costs, I don't know, much more, well, maybe not in your gallery, but because yeah, we operate with low budgets, and it's fun. So we decided that the exhibition, it first was presented in Estonia, so we decided that we have to make it very simple, because sending exhibition, the big box, to another country can cost like 800 euro, so it's extremely big money. So we decided to make it that it has to be in one box. Then we made the manual for this, and we decided to make layers of the models, and this is the concept for the exhibition. So you have just like one feature of the building, and then this is the model hanged in Estonia. Here you have because it's a chapel, so you have a kneeling man here, kneeling pole. And then the exhibition was presented first in Estonian Museum of Architecture, and the models are like this, just 3 layers, because we didn't have money for the 4th layer. So there are 16 models, but what is important, we work as a curator, I worked here with the architects of the presented buildings, so I sent the projects of the models to the architects, to all the 16 architects, and they accepted or not the model, or they made some remarks. So it is important that these models tell something about the building. It's not just a child's play, but they say something when you look at the models. Here is the newspaper. Yeah, and I will show you the last thing. It lasts. It lasts 2 minutes, but maybe okay. I will also comment on this. But what is important in this exhibition, that there are not only just aesthetic projects. Most of these projects are socially oriented. It was very important for me that these buildings make some scenario for a city, for a housing estate, for users. So they are not just formally beautiful buildings, but they give and tell some problem of an architect, of a user, or somebody. It is very interesting because some of the projects, you saw business there. It's funny because one of the projects is the business of the architects, and they decided to open a restaurant, and they failed, but actually they could make themselves a project of the interior of the restaurant. So what you can see during this exhibition and reading this exhibition, these are the, in my opinion, very interesting stories of architects and buildings, and not just design, because I believe these projects are not worth because of the design, but because of the social responsibility. So thank you.